Picture this: a storm is raging, waves are crashing over the deck, the ship is heeling 30 degrees, and nature calls. The only toilet on board is a hole cut into the bow, wide open to wind, spray, and the eyes of the entire crew. One wrong step, and you go overboard along with whatever you were doing. This isn't an exaggeration. For 3.5 centuries of the age of sail, men being swept off the ship while using the heads was a routine enough occurrence to show up again and again in ship's logs. Today, we're digging into how sailors from the 15th to the 19th century, from cabin boys to captains, actually relieved themselves at sea, and why this may be one of the most underrated killers in naval history. Let's start with the numbers. A typical trading or naval vessel of the Dutch East India Company could carry a crew of 300 to 400 men, all packed into a wooden hull maybe 40 to 60 meters long. And the number of toilets provided for all these people? Usually just a handful. Take the Dutch ship Batavia, the one that wrecked off the coast of Australia in 1629 and went down in history for the horrific mutiny and massacre that followed. She carried roughly 340 crew and passengers. The number of latrines on board, 4. 2 of those were reserved strictly for officers. That left the ordinary sailors to share just 2 holes between them, meaning they literally had to queue up to relieve themselves. And this wasn't some unusual case. It was standard for ships of the era. Shipwrights designed hulls around cannons, cargo, and provisions. Sanitation was whatever was left over. Let's start with the numbers. A typical trading or naval vessel of the Dutch East India Company could carry a crew of 300 to 400 men, all packed into a wooden hull maybe 40 to 60 meters long. And the number of toilets provided for all these people? Usually just a handful. Take the Dutch ship Batavia, the one that wrecked off the coast of Australia in 1629 and went down in history for the horrific mutiny and massacre that followed. She carried roughly 340 crew and passengers. The number of latrines on board, 4. 2 of those were reserved strictly for officers. That left the ordinary sailors to share just 2 holes between them, meaning they literally had to queue up to relieve themselves. And this wasn't some unusual case. It was standard for ships of the era. Shipwrights designed hulls around cannons, cargo, and provisions. Sanitation was whatever was left over. The spot where ordinary crew did their business was called the heads, located at the very front of the ship, near the figurehead, which is exactly where the name comes from. In practice, it amounted to nothing more than seats, with holes cut into them, set out on an open grating that extended past the bow. No stalls, no screen, nothing. Just a board with a hole, suspended a couple of meters above churning water. Historian Mike Dash, who researched the Batavia disaster, describes the only thing resembling an amenity available there. A long, tar-stained rope hung down through the hole, with one end trailing in the sea. That was what passed for toilet paper. Sailors would haul up the wet, frayed end and use it to clean themselves. Judging by contemporary accounts, plenty of men simply skipped that particular luxury altogether. Why the bow specifically? Simple engineering logic. That's where the ship cuts through the water, so the current itself carried the waste away, and the prevailing wind blew the smell forward, away from the living quarters at the stern. It had nothing to do with the crew's comfort or health. Purely a practical hydrodynamic choice. In calm seas, a trip to the heads was just an unpleasant routine. The moment a storm hit, though, that exposed platform at the bow turned into a genuine death trap. Waves swept the deck, the ship pitched violently, and there was little to hold on to. So in heavy weather, captains typically banned the crew from going out there at all. Worse still, during storms, every hatch and gun port was sealed shut to keep water out, which also meant cutting off ventilation below decks entirely. Trapped below in the dark and stale air, sailors had 2 options. The more decorous among them used chamber pots. The less fastidious simply squatted over a hatch ladder leading down into the hold, or found a dark corner and relieved themselves there. The trouble was that whatever went into a chamber pot rarely stayed there until morning. Between the constant rolling of the ship and the near total darkness below decks, spills were almost guaranteed. From there, gravity took over. Waste seeped down through gaps in the deck planking from one level to the next, like a multi-story birdcage, until it finally pooled at the very bottom of the hull in the bilge. No wooden hull was ever perfectly watertight. Seawater crept in through the seams of virtually every ship sooner or later, mixed with urine, feces, rotting food scraps, and the occasional dead rat. That seawater formed a toxic sludge that had to be pumped out regularly using the bilge pumps. Eugenio de Salazar, a Spaniard who crossed the Atlantic in 1573, left behind what might be the single most vivid description of what those pumps brought up. He wrote that the contents were fit for neither tongue nor palate, nor for the nostrils, nor even for the eyes, that it came bubbling out like something straight from hell and stank like the devil himself. And pumping it straight into the sea wasn't always possible. Sometimes the sludge could only be pumped up one deck, where it then slowly drained back down through the scuppers and gratings. Once the weather cleared, the crew would scrub the ship as best they could and try to mask the overwhelming stench with vinegar and burning incense. The relief never lasted long. Within days, the hull would reek again, as if plague itself had taken up residence. And that wasn't just a figure of speech. Typhus, dysentery, and scurvy thrived in these conditions, and over the centuries they killed far more sailors than cannon fire ever did. Like almost everything else aboard an old world ship, toilet access was strictly tiered by rank. Officers and wealthy passengers never went anywhere near the bow latrines. They had their own private privies at the stern, close to the captain's quarters. At first, the only real difference was that certain seats were simply reserved for the officers. But by the late Middle Ages, ships began installing what were called garderobes, small box-like structures jutting out from the stern or the side of the aftercastle, the exact same design found in medieval castles. The seat inside was still just a plank with a hole, but at least it was private, an almost unheard of luxury at the time. When ships started adding stern galleries in the 17th century, the officers' latrines moved there as well, and high-ranking passengers gained an entire dedicated room that doubled as luggage storage, washroom, and toilet. Real privacy, which on a ship of that era was worth its weight in gold. The crew up at the bow enjoyed no such comfort. Before the 16th century, they mostly just squatted over open gratings or holes cut straight into the deck planking, or perched on the railing itself. Over time, the design gradually improved. Simple side-mounted seats began appearing. You can still see examples of these on the Swedish warship Vasa, raised from Stockholm harbor in the 20th century, after sinking on her maiden voyage in 1628. By the 17th century, these gave way to freestanding seats, fitted with a rudimentary chute that funneled waste directly down into the water. By the 18th and 19th centuries, shipbuilders were installing entire rows of seats side by side, specifically to cut down on the queues we mentioned earlier. Around 1700, enclosed semicircular stalls called roundhouses started appearing alongside the open bow seats, set aside for petty officers and the sick. Unlike the exposed latrines, these at least offered some shelter from spray and prying eyes. Other solutions followed. From the 17th century onward, ships had pistales built directly into the hull, simple lead or wooden funnels with a pipe running to the outside, meant for quick urination. For more serious business, sailors used so-called seat tubs, hung from the bulwarks near the chain plates, not unlike flower boxes on a balcony. A sailor would climb into one of these and squat over a keyhole shaped opening cut into its base. Discipline around all this was surprisingly strict. According to the naval regulations laid out by Vice Admiral William Monson, the Royal Navy had a peculiar punishment for anyone caught lying on a Monday morning. The offender was publicly named at the mainmast to a chorus of "a liar, a liar, a liar." And for the rest of that week, he was placed under the ship's swabber, responsible for cleaning the exterior of the vessel, which meant, among other things, scrubbing out the latrines. Everything changed with the arrival of steam powered, steel hulled ships in the 19th century. These hulls needed a much sharper, more streamlined bow to cut efficiently through the water, and with that redesign, the old bow platform, latrines and all, simply vanished. To make up for the lost capacity, the seat tubs amidships were replaced with multi-hull platforms. Even that didn't fully solve the bottleneck. Take the British ship Duke of Wellington as an example. In 1870, she was fitted with 6 hull platforms on each side. And yet, according to surviving reports, from 4 in the morning until well after lights out, there were constant queues of men on the upper deck struggling to reach the heads in time. Space was so scarce that not everyone made it. Ship's logs from the period regularly recorded offenses against decency, and every morning, time had to be set aside specifically to clean up the evidence scattered across the deck. So there it is. Something as simple as where to relieve yourself turned out to be one of the most overlooked engineering and social challenges of the age of sail and early steam. It shaped the entire hierarchy on board, fueled deadly epidemics, and claimed lives just as surely as storms or cannon fire ever did. Next time you're annoyed at the line for the bathroom on a plane, spare a thought for the crew of the Batavia. 150 men sharing a single hole in the deck and counting themselves lucky if they even made it there in time.